Hello everyone. I got a request from someone that wanted to know my process for inking my swatches, so I just thought I'd share that with you today. I just started doing this here, honestly, just this weekend because I wanted to be able to see how my inks reacted with water, because honestly I'm not much of a handwriting person. I'm more of a drawing person, and I enjoy the feedback, the feel of the fountain pens on paper. And so I started out with drawing with just the inks, and I've started adding in a little bit of water work with it too. So this is an image here of my Col-O-Ring swatch, and just to kind of show you some of the inks I've got going on here. And just in particular, I like this particular pattern just because it gives me a feel for how things work in dilution, how things work as I take water over them, how things look at full strength, 1:0 concentration versus diluting it out 1:5 and 1:25. So I have an idea of how I can go through this color spectrum and use it in my paintings. Nice thing about this too is I can get a feel for the shimmer and the sheen. This lovely ink here has a nice gold shimmer to it, pretty strong. I can kind of pick that up, and a pretty strong magenta sheen to it, so you can see that there. This particular blue has got a very strong magenta sheen to it as well. And this one's a very strong, potent color. You can see how much that ink dilutes out into the space when I add water to it, as opposed to this particular ink. Also has a little bit of a sheen to it, if I can pick that up here. But a pretty dilute, or a pretty soft blue, much easier to dilute down and get down to those real soft colors if I want. So, you know, when you take a look at three somewhat similar inks, and you can see just the difference in the potency of the ink and how much it disperses out, and how easy it is to dilute down. So I find these swatches helpful for that, and so that's why I chose, instead of just doing a big solid swatch, to put dilutions on there and to actually put a simple little drawing on there so I can get a feel for how it interacts. You know, how much does the ink spread out when I add water to it? How dilute does it get? How does it look when I try to use it in my drawings? And then I do put a drop down here at full strength just to really maximize my ability to tell what kind of sheen comes out of that ink as well. So I think we'll get started here. I chose today to redo this one because I had an ink sneeze issue, and you can see the persimmon little spots on here, and you know, my pickiness just can't let that slide. So we're going to redo this one today. Of course, this one is one that I only have like one cartridge of. It came in my Platinum Preppy pen here, and so I'm just using the straight up standard platinum pigment blue that's contained in that cartridge there. And so some things that I use for these swatches, obviously we need to have a blank, so let me grab that real quick. So we've got a blank here. I've got a little pan, a dish for doing my dilutions and to keep the ink contained. I've got my ink drawn up in a syringe here, and this is a 1cc syringe. I've drawn up 0.2 mils of ink, and you can see the air bubble there. That air bubble is actually the air that'll be in the hub, so I don't worry about that air bubble because it's not going to affect my dilutions. I draw up 2/10 because I want 1/10 to do the full strength ink, and I want 1/10 to do my dilutions. And if I dip into that 1/10 of a mil to do my full strength, then I'm not going to have the same volume. It's going to mess up my dilution. So that's why I've got 2/10 here, and I'll make two little pools of that into my lid, which looks like this. So I've got 1/10 of a mil on one side, 1/10 of a mil on the other, and then I add my dilution water to one side when I'm making my streaks. So I have two more syringes here for us. I've got a 3cc syringe that makes it easier to draw up 0.5 mils. So if I add 5/10 to my 1/10, that gives me a 1:5 dilution. And then if I add 2 more mils, or 20 more tenths, that gives me a 1:25 dilution. So 1/2 of a mil and 2 mils here. Okay. To make my streaks, honestly, I just found this little cheapo dip pen that was in my stack of art supplies here. I have no idea where I even got it, but it's got a nice shape for doing my drops and for doing my streaks. So I've seen people use glass rods or glass stirring sticks for that. I'm intrigued to try it. I don't have any to try, but this works out pretty well for me. It's just the right amount of ink for doing my little streaks here. I've got an old tiny little paintbrush, and this is just perfect for the small size of distributing the water shimmer and finishing off my little flower. And we have a guide for us. So what I did was just made a quick little guide in Paint Shop Pro, printed it off. That way I can have the same font in all of this, and it'll end up being more uniform that way for me. So I did print those off, and then I'm going to cheat today just to make it easier for the video to show up and use a light box and turn down these lights for us. Alright, so there we've got the contrast adjusted. So when I did these, I didn't take into account, of course, the little dot at the top of my swatches, so it doesn't quite fit. So I just cheat a little bit. I'm going to slide this up and we'll compress those words together. So you can see if I push down, you can see that very well, that we can see our writing here. So I start out and I do the pen work first, because that gives my pen work time to dry before I add water. So let's get started on that. I like to do the smaller words with the back side of the nib, just to make a little finer detail for myself, and that's the ink company. So I'm going to get this centered up in here where I want it. And I don't usually tape all this down, I usually just hold it with my fingers, but for the sake of the video I thought it would be easier. So I'll just ink this in real quick for us here. And like I said, did a little cheater and put the words on there just to keep everything the same size and make it uniform for my cards, because that makes me happy when I look at them. So now I'm going to take this and slide it down. I'm going to move pigment off to the side just for aesthetic purposes here. And I'm going to flip over and use the full size. And we'll just ink in our words. And this way, with the two different sizes, it gives me a feel for how the ink looks in heavier flows as well as in finer flows. And when I'm drawing, that's good information for me to have. And I'm sure for those of us that do more calligraphy, that's good information as well. But my heart is in the drawing, so that's what I'm using these swatches for. I'm going to slide this up just a little bit more because I want my flower to fit on. I'm going to knock the blue off to the side a little. There we go. And we'll just ink this in real quick. And then the next thing I'm going to do is ink in the flower. And that's to let these lines start to have a chance to dry. So there you can see where we're at right now. I'm going to set this down so that my drop is just down in the bottom corner there. Slide that over just a little. Alright, and so the thing I like about this little flower drawing is, one, is it's pretty, so that makes me happy, especially with all the different colors. You get all the different colored flowers, but it's a very simple drawing. You know, just a few lines to outline those petals really will do it for you, and it has different areas of lightness and darkness that are nice for when I add water to give me some variety on seeing how the ink reacts more dilute versus more concentrated. And so I've got these little dots up here, and so this is going to be my really dilute area where I really try not to get a ton of ink into the water, and then I can touch the water, the dots, and that'll show me how much it disperses. On these middle ones, this is kind of my mid-gray range area, so I'm going to add about 5 lines or so into this. We'll go ahead and fill in the center so we have a nice solid center here. And then this is going to be my more concentrated area, so I'm going to put more heavier lines through here, and I'm going to fill in a little bit too, just to give myself a little extra ink. And then we'll do some little additions there. And then over here is where my drop is going to sit. And I make it a little bigger than what I originally put my drop in at, but that just gives me a spot to shoot for. So that really ends what I'm going to do with my pen. Now I'm going to make my streaks, and so again, using my little pen or a cotton swab you could use. I just found the cotton swab soaked up a lot of ink and used up a lot of ink, and I had a hard time getting a nice wet amount down without just really saturating it to give my sheen and my shimmer. So I'm going to, here's my little cup. I'm going to dip into one of these little pools, stabilize. I'm going to move this up just a smidgen to get those streaks centered. And then go across, and then I typically do it twice just to get the heavier pool on the right hand side there, and then let that start to disperse out. I'll wipe off my nib here. Now I'm going to add more pigment into my spot, and we're going to let that be pretty heavy so that it'll dry and it'll show us sheen and shimmer, and a little less in the center of the flower, but just a little there. And so I'll let those start to dry. I have to be a little cautious over here that I don't hit that and make it streak. I've done that a few times. Now I'm going to switch to the other 10th that hasn't been scavenged from, and I'm going to add 1/2 ml of water. Okay, and take my little instrument and just make sure it's nicely mixed. Get myself a drop, and I'm going to add my second streak here. And as you add water to some of these inks, it stands up off the paper a little bit, but if you go over it a couple times, it'll smooth out, and then I leave the heavier concentration off on the right hand side, and that way it shows me what it does in heavier concentration as well as more dry concentrations. Now I'm going to add the 2 mils to the rest here, being careful not to drag my other pool in, and just get that mixed up well. And this is my 1:25 dilution, so it's 2.5 mils again, 2.5 mils to 1/10 ml of ink. And I don't want that too wet. There we go. Stabilize my paper, and especially on this 1:25, because the water tension, you can see it wants to bead up a little. There. And so over here we've got our more concentrated side, over here we've got our less concentrated side. And so that is the end of our tool usage. And now we're going to use the brush. And so at this point I need myself to have a little bit of water, which I'll bring over here. And I'm just going to dip into the water so my brush is just wet here. And we really don't need the light box anymore, so let me shut that off. Turn us on some lights so we can see a little bit more. There we go. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding my water to this. And I take this little brush, this real fine brush, and I just run, just touching that along the side, and I let it start to disperse. Okay? Start at the middle of the petal, run along the side, let it start to disperse. Clean my brush out so I got fresh water again. Run along the other side. Okay. And I'm just going to do that around each of the petals here. And you're going to get a variety depending on how much water you lay into this, but I let the ink kind of do what it wants, because this is how I use it when I'm painting. And so I want to see what kind of an effect I'm going to have as the water touches off the ink and comes through. And obviously if you keep going on it, the water's going to get more and more concentrated with ink, which you're going to see here in a minute when we do these heavier areas. And so you can certainly adjust from there in your paintings. I've also done this where I've outlined larger fonts and then used this to fill in and do some cool shading effects. So I'm going to go around the edge and start to let this ink start to come out here. And now over here I just give it a quick wash over and let the ink do what it will. And what that's going to show me, one, is how much do these lines retain versus how much do they spread out. This is my more concentrated, so do the same thing. And this little guy here. Okay, so I've specifically just stayed around the lines themselves. Let that start to soak in a little bit. The next pass I'm going to do up here on my least concentrated areas, I'm going to take water just into this part, not up to the line where I'm going to pull more ink, but just up into this part and just draw it down a little bit. Okay, you see it start to flow there? Okay, get that filled in with water and let the ink just pull into that and start to dilute out. And with really dense inks, that'll really pull in there. This ink's a little bit lighter, and so it's going to be more subtle. And then I'm going to bring some water around these dots, and I'm just going to touch them, and let them do their thing. And that just shows me how much it wants to spread out and away from there. Now on these guys, where I've got white left, again, I'm just going to go in here and just touch the diluted areas to each other and let that disperse. trying not to get into the solid lines. I don't want to pick up a ton of pigment here. This is my lighter shading. And the same thing goes down here. And that's it. You don't have to get 100% coverage here. I kind of like the artistic bent to it. But that's my little swatches. And so we'll let that dry off. But when it does, these darker areas up here, you can already see the ring starting to form as it's drying off, and we're going to see that little bit of red shimmer come up. Same thing down here. These little drops down here take a while to fill in, but once they do, you really get a full effect of the sheen of the pigment. And if there's a shimmer, the shimmer will come through too. And so that's my swatches. I hope that's helpful for everybody. Just to kind of show you a comparison here, we'll put him down. And again, there's our one that we did previously. So, you know, it's not 100% the same, but pretty darn close. And that just gives you a feel for what it looks like as we dry off a little bit here. I hope you found this helpful. This is just my process that I go through. You can actually crank these out pretty darn fast. I did 15 of them in a couple hours here. But I find them very helpful when I'm trying to decide what kind of pigments am I going to use when I'm going to do my drawings, especially if I'm going to do blending and things like that. I find it very helpful for seeing how it behaves when I mix water into things and what kind of effect I can get. Because sometimes I just don't really even think about what's it going to look like if I dilute it out when I'm trying to go for a nice light sky blue, for instance. Or if we're taking a look at like something like oxblood, I mean, you can really get down to a lovely light peach in here. It's helpful if I do that and not smear everything. Same thing goes for some of these pinks, that you can really get a feel for what kind of pink dilution you have. I mean, this one's got a lovely flesh tone appearance to it, and they're really light. Same thing with the sunny orange. This particular one has a yellow band that shows up when you get real dilute. So it's interesting to see what these guys will show up showing you as you dilute them out, but I find these very helpful. So hope you all have a good day, and we'll see you later.